Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman from the Chicago School made significant contributions in economics. One of the distinctive aspects of the Chicago School's approach is its emphasis on empirical analysis and testing. Friedman and his colleagues at the Chicago School address economic questions empirically. They formulate hypotheses that predict the outcomes of certain policies or interventions. For example, they might predict that rent control will result in less housing available to prospective tenants, making house hunting more challenging for poor individuals. These hypotheses are then subjected to rigorous empirical scrutiny to assess their validity and determine the effectiveness of various economic theories. The Chicago School advocates for limited government intervention, primarily due to their recognition of both market and government failures. While acknowledging that markets sometimes fail to allocate resources efficiently, they also contend that governments often fail as well. Contrary to common public debates where politicians argue that government intervention can resolve market problems, the Chicago School argues that government failures tend to lead to worse outcomes than market failures. Rather than assuming a perfect government capable of solving market failures, the Chicago School suggests a comprehensive analysis that compares imperfect markets, with all their recognized imperfections, to imperfect governments and their imperfections. This comparison often reveals that government failures surpass market failures. The Chicago School highlights a gap between the policymakers' intentions and the actual consequences of their advocated policies. This gap often leads to unintended outcomes and perverse incentives. For example, minimum wages are intended to ensure people can earn a sufficient income. In practice, however, minimum wages may make finding a job more difficult for low-skilled workers. In other words, government policy compounded the problem poor people faced. Similarly, many government policies may achieve positive intended consequences, but they often overlook the negative unintended consequences. The Chicago School emphasizes the importance of considering both the positive intended consequences and the negative unintended consequences of policies. While raising the minimum wage may increase the wages for some workers, other workers will be left unemployed. The Chicago School argues that, in most cases, the negative unintended consequences outweigh the positive intended ones. However, determining the balance between intended and unintended consequences requires empirical examination of the evidence. The problem, according to the Chicago School, is that policymakers fail to account for self-interest and human nature in guiding individual behavior. Policymakers often overlook these factors when designing policies, leading to outcomes that deviate from their intended goals. According to the Chicago School, the role of government should primarily focus on 4 key areas, as identified by Milton Friedman. Firstly, government should protect the nation from both internal and external enemies through military defense against foreign threats and a police force to combat domestic criminal activities. Secondly, government should provide the administration of justice to resolve conflicts peacefully. Disagreements and conflicts are inevitable in society, and a neutral arbiter, such as the government's courts, should be available to interpret contracts and settle disputes. Thirdly, the Chicago School recognizes that certain goods and services, known as public goods, cannot be adequately provided through voluntary exchange in the market. Public goods are non-excludable and non-rival. For example, national defense is a classic example of a public good because individuals cannot be excluded from its benefits. And consuming more defense does not diminish its availability for others. The provision of public goods necessitates government involvement as voluntary contributions would likely be insufficient. That is, public goods suffer from the free rider problem. The fourth area of government responsibility, according to Friedman, is to protect the irresponsible. This includes children and individuals who are mentally incapable of making decisions on their own behalf. Government intervention is crucial to safeguard the interests of these vulnerable groups. The Chicago School's approach, often referred to as the social market approach, recognizes the importance of government in fulfilling these responsibilities. However, it advocates for utilizing market mechanisms wherever possible. For instance, government involvement in education does not necessarily require direct provision of schools. Instead, Friedman proposes alternatives, such as school vouchers or school choice programs, allowing parents to select the educational institutions that align with their preferences. This approach underscores the belief that government has social responsibilities, but should aim to achieve them through market-oriented means. In summary, Milton Friedman and the Chicago School approach economic questions through empirical analysis and hypothesis testing. They argue for limited government intervention by highlighting the prevalence of government failure in comparison to market failure. The Chicago School emphasizes the need to consider both intended and unintended consequences of policies, along with recognizing the significance of self-interest and human nature in shaping behavior. While government has specific responsibilities in areas such as defense, administration of justice, provision of public goods, and protection of the irresponsible, the Chicago School promotes the utilization of market mechanisms to fulfill these responsibilities whenever feasible.